Now, I will tell you over and over again that plyos are enormously high in terms of intensity, but nothing compares to changing the direction of momentum. What's going on YouTube? I'm Atticus Watson, coach, educator, and lover of all things plyometric. Today, we are going to be looking at potentially the greatest jumper of all time, Stefan Holm. So if you don't know who Stefan Holm is, he was the Olympic champion in 2004 in Athens, Greece for the high jump. He's also really well known for being one of the shortest high jumpers and having the biggest deficit ratio of anyone on earth. I think his ratio was between 58 to 60 centimeters. He was around 180 tall and actually high jumped a personal best of 2 meters 40. So we're looking at someone under 6 foot that could almost high jump 8 feet. So today we're going to be looking at some of the crazy methods that he used to make him one of the best jumpers of all times. JT, let's get into it. So straight out of the gates, we are digging into Holm hurdles. Holm hurdles are takeoffs similar to the high jump, where we're running off of a single leg takeoff and we are clearing enormously high barriers. He's using hurdles here. These are great hurdles because they easily just knock off the upright, and you see straight away just how impressive this is. These hurdles are 6 feet, 185 centimeters high, and he's doing them repetitively. He's going over 4 or 5 hurdles back to back to back. So let's dig into why these would be so valuable for someone that's chasing vertical jumps and maybe someone that's just involved in team sports. Now, obviously these are super specific to high jumping. What I love particularly about them is that there's this intensity. There's this intensity to really put your foot down with regards to the turnover rate and speed that he uses between the hurdles. Now, without that, he's not clearing those barriers. As soon as he lands, it's about accelerating as hard as you can off of that hurdle and driving into that takeoff. And that's one of the number one reasons why Stefan is so good at clearing these and why he's one of the best jumpers ever. He's able to use the highest and fastest speeds to stimulate that takeoff to propel him upwards. So last year on my Instagram, I actually did a video comparing Stefan to his young son, Melvin Holm. Take a look at the video here and some of the reasons why Stefan is so effective with the Holm hurdles. So I saw this awesome video of Melvin Holm come up today doing a great impression of his father. And it's so great to see just how similar they are in the way that they move over those barriers. Watch the old man clearing 185 centimeters here, which is around 6 feet. Now, what does Melvin do really well that's similar to his father? As he comes off this barrier here, I'll show you just how he sets up this takeoff. You can see how rigid this position is here, and what he does fantastically well is maintain stiffness. He doesn't lose much joint position. He runs off that penultimate and creates a great blocking position to then clear that hurdle beautifully. Now, where Stefan did extremely well was doing similar things, but actually creating a real high velocity off of that penultimate stride, and that then sets up his enormously stiff and powerful takeoff leg. You can see he holds this great position. That free leg kind of comes up and under, and then he blocks here. And what does it do? Well, it catapults him into the air. And this is where I think Melvin will need to go in terms of maybe getting to those sort of higher heights over those barriers. You watch him run off this right leg here. Watch how much of a split he gets. Runs off of it, pops over. Amazing to watch these guys do what they do. So we saw that setting up the takeoff from Melvin was really effective, but one of the standout points was the speed in which Stefan carried into that next takeoff. There's no hesitation, it's land and takeoff, literally. You're running hard through those 3 strides and bang, you are loading that leg up with as much speed as possible and maintaining insane levels of stiffness to pivot over the top. This is exactly like a pole vault. So other great points that come from Holm hurdles is something that not a lot of people do. And that's using horizontal momentum and converting it into vertical momentum. JT, run a clip of Stefan high jumping. Where I think this is really valuable, and that's amongst team sports specifically, is teaching people how to cut and change direction. Changing direction and cutting is no different than in changing the direction of momentum that you're traveling in. It is exactly that. So with these Holm hurdles, we're carrying enormous horizontal velocity, and then we're creating enormous braking forces that are propelling us upwards to clear this hurdle. That is the same if you are cutting around a defender. You'll do a jab step and you really are punching that leg into the ground to create that trajectory out in a different direction. And that is going to solve the problem of moving past and navigating around defending players. The second component to this that I think is really valuable for team sports athletes is having a stimulus that you potentially can't create anywhere else. Now, I will tell you over and over again that plyos are enormously high in terms of intensity, but nothing compares to changing the direction of momentum, carrying enormous amounts of speed and then applying a massive amount of braking force and then taking all of that insane energy and using it in your propulsive stage of a takeoff. Now, I feel like if you're able to handle those sorts of loads at those sorts of speeds, then cutting in and out of movements, changing directions, braking to beat a defender, changing the direction of the game is going to be really quite simple for you if you're able to do these sorts of movements. The other component to this is looking at the rate in which you're loading the body. Nothing will quite compare to the speed in which you're whipping that foot down and having to create stiffness. That's also going to be a massive component to a lot of short, sharp changes in team sports. It's also going to provide you with the skills to actually solve problems and to create braking patterns or changes of directions faster than your opponent. If you're the type of player that puts their foot down and it feels like you're waiting to then be able to create propulsion and move away from it, then teaching yourself to get to this sort of stage is really valuable. Now, you might not ever clear 6 foot, but it could be that you're going over 3 or 4 foot barriers using the Holm hurdle technique. And ultimately, it's about dealing with collisions here, dealing with enormously intense collisions at such rapid rates. And ultimately, that is sport, whether it's in contact with a person, whether it's in contact with colliding with the floor. It is about dealing with those collisions best. And that is why I love Holm hurdles. Now, the second part as to why I think Holm was the GOAT actually really relates to this video here, called the 6 degrees of jumping from Stefan Holm. Stefan was known to be able to clear a 2-meter bar or a 6'7" high jump bar with 6 different high jump takeoffs. So as you watch here in the video, first one, straight on tuck jump. He's tuck jumping over 2 meters. The second one, the Californian roll, which is kind of like a straddle technique, but it's not rolling over the top. So if you know high jump, you'll know what the straddle is. The third one, he calls the Holm roll, which is basically a tuck, but then a little somersault over the top to create that rotation and clearance. Fourth one, old school straddle. They were using this before the Fosbury flop. People cleared 235 with this, which is insane. Fifth one is old school scissor kick, similar run up to your high jump technique. And then the final and most impressive one for him is a standard Fosbury flop. Now you might be thinking like, why would this be important to me as a team sports player? If I play soccer, if I play basketball, if I play football, if I play rugby. What I love about it is that it shows his broad capacity to create enormously large impulses, to do all the things that a high jumper needs to do, but he's able to do it in all these slightly different ways. And he's not pigeonholed to this one way, this one thing that he's ultimately great at. Now it might obviously be this kind of transfer over, he's a great high jumper using the Fosbury, and that kind of relays to the other components. And sure it does, but also it shows that in a very closed, singular, capacity-based event, like running in a straight line around a curve and then taking off for height, which is very simplistic in comparison to the complexity of team sports, he still is trying to create some variability there. So we're creating a larger bandwidth. And I think that's something that you should take forward in all of your training, is having a high level of variability. I believe that, first of all, it's going to help with regards to not picking up an injury in doing something just slightly different to the perfect way that you've been trying to do it. It's creating a little bit of bandwidth for how you can complete skills or movements and really not just pigeonhole you to being able to only do it in one way. I think there's nothing wrong as well with being able to also execute the skill at the kind of last component with slightly different nuances. So this is like, for a high jumper, being acrobatic in all sorts of different ways is really preferable to him. That could be the same with, let's say, a basketballer. If you are making a move to the hoop, you want to be able to manipulate your body in hundreds of different ways so that realistically your defender's never gonna understand what you're gonna do next. That variability and that randomness can come in there where you're always leaving your opponent second guessing. I think the third component here is looking at having an athlete that can display all sorts of different levels of athleticism. And that shows variability in your training. So if you're one of those people that is very kind of one-dimensional, I've only got this one thing that I can go to. I'm fast, or I can create a lot of power. I have, a certain jump shot that I can only shoot. When you have a lot of variability in your training that also feeds into your specific work, there is a chance for you to be able to portray things in a multitude of different ways. So if you can jump high, if you're working hard on jumping high, you're carrying a lot of variability in your training, you could probably run fast. You could probably jump far. You could probably cut and change direction pretty well. And I think this is a superpower if you are working in the team sports realms. Now, the third and final element is looking at how Stefan used plyometrics, and horizontal plyometrics specifically. And actually, from experience, in 2012, I was at a workshop where Stefan and his father were in the UK, and they presented to all nationally ranked high jumpers and their coaches. And Stefan talked a lot about how horizontal based bounds and hops showed what kind of shape he was in. So he would have used a 10 hop or 10 bound for distance measured to land then into the sandpit. And he knew that with a certain distance that he'd achieved, he would be at a certain level of fitness. Now, obviously this would have been a lot more general, but actually is a great marker and something that you can use with your athletes or yourself to give you an idea as to how well you can handle eccentric force and how well you can stabilize, pivot off that foot effectively, and create propulsive distance with that fast sweeping action of the foot. Now, obviously it gets more intense as you go to hopping. So understand that if you are going to go out and measure this stuff, do be aware to start with bounding and then go to hopping eventually. The hopping as well would have given him a great idea of asymmetry left to right. Now, obviously he would have been a dominant left foot hopper, whereas right leg would have probably been a little bit less than it. Know that that is okay, and that a discrepancy of in and around 10% is quite natural for a single foot jumper. So some of these movements you're seeing are what looks like bounds over maybe 40 or 50 meters, which is pretty intense And these look like bounds for distance as well. They look like pretty intense movements. You can see he starts from a standing start here, and it is just push, 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 and really starting to drive that bound over that distance. Now, if you are trying to improve your high jumping ability, I would always make sure you're doing distance work as well. And why I say this is because we spend so much time focusing on a vertical impulse that often we live too much in what potentially could be seen as the slower takeoff realms if you're to compare it to the horizontal side. So where you can use distance-based or horizontal-based emphasis is for the speed end of that spectrum. So let's say that the ground contact time for your high jump or your dunking is anywhere between, let's say, 0.18 to maybe even 0.25 if you're dunking. Your takeoffs or bounds for distance could actually be significantly lower than that. If you're aware of world-class high jumping figures, then you have obviously a spectrum of high jumpers. But those that are kind of in the average speed ranges are around 0.17. Long jump, on the other hand, is actually a lot closer to 0.12, 0.13. Now, whilst this is only 0.04 of a second, you've got to think of that as percentages. And as a percent, that's almost 20% faster. So this is why I would use bounds for distance as a key practice for some of my plyometrics that I would deem as being something quite specific here. So using those bounds for speed qualities, using the bounds as well as a way to do things at maybe a more extensive format. Now I find that because you're off the foot quicker with a more horizontally focused movement, these are a real go-to for being able to get more volume in. And I think that should be the two ways that you look at using horizontal-based movements if you're chasing vertical jumps. So those are three reasons why I think this man is the GOAT, the greatest jumper of all time. I think his ability to carry velocity, create an enormous impulse, and to maintain stiffness and pivot over that foot really effectively is what makes him so effective at what he does. And those three elements that I spoke about are correlated exactly towards that. Ultimately, if you are working within team sports, I think having this real diverse ability to do things at speed, to do things with a super high ground reaction force, and to combine them together in a variety of different movements is what's going to serve you really well. It doesn't matter whether you're playing soccer or whether you're a high jumper. Being able to create force and being able to do that at speed is what's going to win the day. So if you're thinking about this sort of training and you're wanting to improve what you're doing, then first of all, you need to check out plusplyos.com and check out our plyometric programs because they are going to give you all of these components. It teaches you about how to handle overload and how to do that at speed. But most of all, it teaches you how to do it in multiple directions, planes, and different movement patterns. And I think variability is always going to win the day if you are a team sports player as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Stefan is always going to be one of the greatest jumpers of all time. What he did was really unique. What he did with his training, I think, was really quite simple. He continued to chase speed and he continued to try to create larger impulses in those short time frames. And he did it in awesome fashion. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Hop to it.